I'm Erin Martin, 34, and I built a life from scratch, working 2 jobs through college, funding a business from my inheritance. For years, I supported my husband's dreams while putting mine on hold. But when he faked his own kidnapping to run off with his secretary and tried to scam me out of $250,000, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been betrayed by someone you carried for years? If so, share your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before I dive in, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose yourself after someone crossed the line, hit like and subscribe. Because what came next, no one saw coming. I met Marcus the first week of junior year. He was the guy who didn't try too hard, but somehow still ended up at the center of every conversation. He had this way of turning even the most mundane classroom debate into something that made people lean forward, like he was revealing a secret. We were paired on a group project in our marketing class. I was laser-focused on the deliverables. He strolled in late, wearing a backwards cap and carrying a smoothie, and said, "Let me guess, you've already got a color-coded spreadsheet." I did. He smiled like that proved something about both of us, and somehow, we got an A on the project. I was studying finance, with a minor in data analytics. My schedule was stacked with early morning lectures and back-to-back shifts at the campus bookstore and a neighborhood diner just off campus. My scholarships covered tuition, but everything else was on me. Rent, groceries, textbooks. My parents helped where they could, but we weren't the kind of family that had college savings. I learned early how to stretch every dollar and still show up looking polished and prepared. Marcus, on the other hand, didn't worry much about money. His parents paid his tuition and sent him a monthly allowance. He called it a baseline subsidy, like he was a startup himself. He liked to talk about ideas, apps, niche products, disruptive brands. Nothing ever stuck for long, but he had a natural charisma. People wanted to work with him. Professors gave him the benefit of the doubt. He was good at selling vision, even if there wasn't always a plan to back it up. We started dating halfway through the semester. It happened gradually. Study sessions that turned into late-night walks. Coffee runs before exams. One morning, he showed up at the diner during my shift and sat through my entire double, tipping me $50 at the end with a note that said, "For the CEO of the Breakfast Rush." I rolled my eyes, but I kept the note. After graduation, he wanted to stay in the city to chase opportunities. I got a job as a junior analyst at a mid-sized firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it had benefits, and I was good at it. Marcus moved in with me 3 weeks after I signed the lease. I paid the rent and utilities. He told people he was between launches. For a while, I didn't mind. I believed in him. He had this way of talking about the future that made it seem like everything we were doing, every sacrifice, was part of some bigger picture. He said I grounded him, that he could never be who he was without me. I bought groceries, cooked, handled the bills. He gave me vision boards and excitement and long-winded ideas over wine. It felt like a fair trade. When he finally did start a company, I was the one who ran the numbers on the business plan. I helped him build the investor pitch deck, stayed up late editing the copy on his first website, even designed the logo when he couldn't decide between 3 freelancers. We launched his first product line out of our apartment. For 6 months, we lived with boxes stacked to the ceiling and a label printer permanently installed on the dining table. I gave him $50,000 from my inheritance to keep the company afloat when their first major deal fell through. It was supposed to be a bridge loan. We even signed an agreement, something I insisted on, more as a professional habit than distrust. He never paid it back. Eventually, I stopped asking. We got married the year the company landed a contract with a lifestyle brand in LA. His parents hosted the engagement party but didn't offer much else. I planned everything. Hired the caterer, chose the venue, coordinated the invites, and paid the deposits. We got married at a vineyard outside the city. It was small but beautiful. I wore a dress I found on clearance and altered myself. People told us we looked like a power couple. They saw the Instagram posts, the matching blazers at networking events, the conference panels where he introduced me as the real brains of the operation. What they didn't see were the nights I stayed up balancing our shared budget while he slept off drinks from a pitch meeting. Or the way he slowly handed off every unglamorous task to me, taxes, legal filings, supplier disputes, because he found them draining. When he hired Clarissa, I didn't think much of it. He said the company needed someone organized to handle day-to-day logistics so he could focus on strategy. She was fresh out of grad school, bright and enthusiastic. She called me Mrs. Martin the first time we met and laughed nervously when I told her to just call me Erin. I didn't see it then. I wasn't looking. By that point, I'd been running so much of our life on autopilot, I didn't notice how much I'd put aside. The graduate program I'd wanted to apply to. The side consulting work I'd turned down to avoid conflict of interest with his firm. The friendships that faded because I was always working or covering for something he'd dropped. But from the outside, we looked solid. We posted anniversary photos in matching outfits, sent out holiday cards with branded envelopes. At company events, he called me his secret weapon. I laughed every time. The thing about being the support system is that people forget you're there until something collapses. I didn't realize how much of the weight I was carrying until later, but looking back, it was always clear. I was the one building the infrastructure. He was just talking about the skyline. We'd been married 5 years when he started traveling more. At first, it was small trips, conferences, trade shows, investor meetings. He'd bring me back branded pens and local chocolate and act like he was gone a day, not a week. I kept the souvenirs in a drawer. I didn't need them, but it felt better than confronting the silence that had started growing between us. Sometimes I wonder if he knew back then what he was planning. If the fake kidnapping was already an idea forming in his head, or if it happened all at once, a bad impulse acted on in a worse moment. I don't know, and honestly, I'm not sure it matters. What I do know is this: I was the one who kept our life functioning while he dreamed. And when he disappeared, when he staged that pathetic stunt in Cabo, I was the one who called the police. I was the one who opened the door when they came with questions. I was the one who unraveled the mess he left behind. But that part comes later. For now, all I knew was that I'd built a life around someone who never intended to stay grounded. He just needed someone steady to launch from, and I volunteered, not knowing I'd be the one paying for the crash. It started gradually, like most things that go wrong do. Marcus said he was swamped with investor calls and supplier meetings. His phone was always pressed to his ear when I walked into the room, and even when he wasn't actively talking, he'd scroll through messages like someone expecting a crisis. Dinner became a question mark. I'd text around 6 to ask if he'd be home and get a vague, not sure, still in meetings in return. I'd make something simple anyway, just in case. Most nights it went cold before I covered it and shoved it in the fridge. At first, I assumed it was a growth phase. The company had picked up a few new clients, and his calendar genuinely was full. I was still managing the books for him on the side, unpaid, of course, but he'd stopped asking my opinion on anything. When I'd bring up a budget line or flag a vendor inconsistency, he'd nod without listening. Then later he'd tell Clarissa to handle it instead. I found out because she emailed me by mistake, asking if I had an updated login for our CRM system. I replied politely, copied Marcus, and he never mentioned it. There was a shift in his tone around that time. It wasn't overt, just a slightly sharper edge. He started teasing me in front of people. "Erin's the numbers police," he'd say with a smirk during team dinners, or "she won't let me spend a dime without a pie chart." Everyone laughed, including me, but the jokes lingered longer than they should have. At home, he said I was too serious, that I didn't know how to relax anymore. One night he came back late from a company retreat in Tahoe, dropped his bag at the door and said, "You should have come. Everyone loosened up for once. You'd have hated it." I asked what he meant and he said, "You're all structure now. No spark. You used to be fun." He kissed the top of my head before walking past me into the kitchen, like that would soften the sting. I remember lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had changed. I still believed in us, still wanted us to work, but I was starting to feel like I was orbiting him, not standing beside him anymore. There was one night I can't forget. I had come home early from work after a last-minute meeting cancellation. I didn't announce it, just walked in quietly, grateful to have a few unexpected hours to breathe. I heard him in his office, laughing. Not the polite chuckle he gave clients, but a real laugh. The kind I hadn't heard in a while. I paused in the hallway. I know I shouldn't have, but I listened. "Stop, babe," he said, then laughed again. "You're gonna get me in trouble." The air in my lungs felt thick. I opened the office door without knocking. He looked up quickly, surprised. Then just as fast, his face shifted into something neutral. He covered the phone with his hand and said, "Hey, didn't know you were home." I asked who he was talking to. He said it was Clarissa. They were going over projections for next quarter, and she made a joke about the team happy hour. I raised an eyebrow. "You called her babe?" He didn't blink. "Oh, she says that to everyone. It's just office sarcasm. You know how she is." I didn't know how she was. I barely saw her. But apparently, she knew enough about our home life to get that comfortable with him. I let it go, told myself it was harmless, that I was just tired and overreacting. That Marcus wouldn't cheat. Not him, not after everything I'd done to support his business. His dream. But from that night on, I noticed how often he brought her up. Clarissa already handled that. Clarissa had a great idea for our next pitch. Clarissa thinks we should outsource fulfillment next quarter. Her name slid into every conversation, as if she were suddenly the other half of his brain. He used to talk about my ideas that way. He used to text me mid-meeting to ask how I'd frame a proposal. I used to be his sounding board. Now I was his afterthought. One weekend, we were both home for once, and I suggested we take a short trip, just the two of us. A cabin up north, or maybe even just a staycation, something simple to reconnect. He said he couldn't. Too much on his plate. The timing was off. Besides, he said, we'd probably just talk about work the whole time. I said that might not be a bad thing. At least we'd be talking. He shrugged and turned back to his laptop. A few days later, I saw a hotel reservation confirmation in our shared email. 2 nights in San Diego. I didn't recognize the hotel, but the dates matched the time he said he'd be out of town for meetings. I asked him about it that night. He said it was a mix-up. That Clarissa had booked it for a client summit, and the email got sent to our shared address because he used my rewards account by mistake. It sounded plausible. Almost. But something in his voice felt off, too smooth, too rehearsed. I tried not to spiral. I told myself it wasn't proof of anything, that I'd be a fool to assume the worst. Still, I logged into the hotel account and looked at the reservation details. 2 guests. King's Suite. No conference center on site. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I told myself I needed more than suspicion. I told myself I still loved him, and love meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt. But I started noticing other things. He changed his phone password, started taking calls outside. He bought new clothes, nothing extravagant, just sleeker, more fitted. He shaved more often, started using cologne again. The kind he used when we first started dating. Meanwhile, I was still the one coordinating our mortgage payments, handling quarterly tax filings, tracking vendor invoices. Still the one making sure we didn't overdraw when he forgot to submit a reimbursement request. He began pulling away physically, too. He used to wrap his arms around me when I cooked. Now he stood at a distance, phone in hand. Our bed, once a place we met halfway no matter how tired we were, became a line he rarely crossed. He always had an excuse: exhaustion, stress, meetings early the next day. At night, I lay awake beside someone who no longer looked me in the eye for more than a few seconds. I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. I was too focused on keeping everything upright: his company, our finances, the illusion that our life still made sense. One night, I stayed late at work. My boss asked for a last-minute audit report, and I dove into it gratefully. Anything to keep my mind occupied. When I finally got home, the apartment was quiet. Marcus's laptop was open on the couch. There was a receipt next to it, 2 glasses of wine, 1 shared appetizer, charged to the corporate card. The restaurant was the same one where we'd celebrated our first anniversary. I picked up the receipt and stared at the handwriting on the tip line. It wasn't his. It was rounder, looped, a small heart doodled next to the total. I replaced it exactly where I found it. I think that's when I knew. Not the whole picture, not the depths of what he was about to do. But I knew the man I married was already halfway out the door. I just hadn't figured out yet whether he was walking or running. Marcus was supposed to fly to Austin for a client pitch. It wasn't out of the ordinary. He'd been traveling more frequently, and this one, he said, was important. Big-name investor, potential long-term contract. He was unusually calm the morning of the trip, sipping his coffee while scrolling through emails, barely touching the breakfast I made. I offered to drive him to the airport since it was on my way to the office. He hesitated, then agreed. The drive was quiet. He didn't play his usual podcast. He stared out the window most of the way, his fingers drumming against the armrest. When we pulled up to the departures lane, he turned to me and kissed my cheek, quick, impersonal. "Wish me luck," he said, reaching for his carry-on. I told him to text when he landed. He nodded without looking back. That was the last normal moment I remember. 2 days later, I was working from home when my phone rang. Blocked number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Aaron Martin?" a man's voice asked, calm, measured. "Yes, who is this?" "We have your husband. He's alive for now. If you want him back, you'll transfer $250,000 to the account number we text you next." My throat closed. "What are you talking about?" The line went dead. I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, still holding the phone to my ear even after the call ended. My body went cold. A minute later, a text came through. It was a photo. Marcus, tied to a chair in what looked like a concrete room. His face was pale, eyes wide. The rope around his chest was loosely tied, but convincing enough if you weren't looking too closely. The message said, "Don't call the police." I called the police. Not right away. First, I stood there, staring at the image, wondering if I was dreaming. Then I paced the apartment in tight circles, whispering his name like that would bring him home. Finally, I sat down, forced my hands to stop shaking, and called 911. The dispatcher was calm, asked for details. I forwarded the photo and text. Within 20 minutes, 2 detectives were at my door. I handed over Marcus's itinerary, his flight confirmation, hotel info in Austin, anything I had. They were professional but gentle, asking questions with quiet urgency. One of them, a woman named Detective Vega, said something about ransom scams, but told me they'd treat it seriously either way. They asked if Marcus had any enemies, any debts. I said no, not that I knew of. They asked if I had $250,000 available. "No," I said, "and even if I did, I wouldn't wire it without knowing he was alive." They nodded, took the phone, said they'd escalate. I barely slept that night. The detectives stayed in touch, checking in every few hours. They tracked the text to a burner phone, then pinged the nearest cell towers. The origin was Austin. It wasn't even in the country. It was in Cabo San Lucas. Detective Vega called the next afternoon. "We've coordinated with local authorities," she said. "We're going in." She didn't tell me when, just that they had a location, that they'd found a booking under Marcus's name at a luxury resort. I was sitting on the edge of our bed when she called back, her voice clipped, unreadable. "He's safe," she said. "No injuries, but you're going to want to sit down." I told her I already was. "He wasn't kidnapped." I didn't respond, couldn't. He was at the resort, poolside, with a woman named Clarissa Hart. It took a moment for the name to register. "Clarissa." "His assistant." I asked her to repeat it. She did. "He was lounging by the pool," she said. "Shirtless, holding a drink. She was on his lap. They weren't restrained. They weren't being held." "What did he say?" I asked, barely able to form the words. "He claimed it was a misunderstanding," Vega said. "Said the photo was a joke that got out of hand. That Clarissa sent it as a prank." I didn't say anything. "He's being held for questioning by Mexican authorities. We'll notify you if charges are filed here." I hung up without saying goodbye. For a long time, I didn't move. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I looked around at the space we'd shared, our framed vacation photos, the worn armrest on his side of the couch, the coffee mug he left in the sink that morning he flew out. Everything looked the same. Nothing was. It wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. He'd planned this, faked a kidnapping, fabricated a ransom, tried to extract $250,000 from me, from the woman who had covered his rent, funded his company, managed his accounts, paid for his wedding, cooked his dinners. I opened my laptop and searched the resort's name. The homepage loaded slowly, full of pastel colors and stock photos of couples on white sand beaches. One of the photos matched the background of the picture he was in, right down to the striped cushions. That night, I went through our finances. He had emptied one of our accounts the week before the trip, our overflow account. It wasn't our main checking, but it held over $30,000. I hadn't noticed the withdrawal. He must have timed it to avoid the automatic notifications I usually set. I checked our credit cards. He'd booked the flights with points, but the room charges were real. I sat there until sunrise, staring at line items, watching the collapse of my life in spreadsheet form. The next morning, Marcus called. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail. Aaron, I messed up. It got out of hand. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I need to explain. Please call me back. I played it twice, then deleted it. Later that day, Clarissa emailed me, through the company account. I didn't know he was going to do that, she wrote. He said it was a joke. I never agreed to the photo thing. I thought you should know. No apology, just that. The detectives followed up with me once, told me Marcus would likely face charges. Insurance fraud, possibly wire fraud if they could prove intent. They asked if I wanted to press charges personally. I said I'd consider it. But all I could think about was that photo. The way he looked at the camera, the calculated angle, the loosely tied rope. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a lapse in judgment, it was a performance. I called his parents. They hadn't heard from him. When I told them what happened, there was a long silence. His mother asked if I was sure. I said yes. His father said, we always hoped he'd outgrow this. That told me more than they realized. I didn't cry, not then, not even when I finally took off my wedding ring later that night and set it on the bathroom counter. I just stared at it, the little silver band I paid for, engraved with the words, built together. Except we didn't. I built it, and he burned it for a vacation with his secretary. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was surgical. He knew how much I'd done for him, and he did it anyway, not out of desperation, not because he had no other choice. He did it because he thought I'd forgive him. Because he believed I'd clean up the mess. Again, because every other time I had. But this time, there was nothing to salvage. There was only scorched earth, and a woman sitting in the ashes, deciding what to do next. The day after they found him in Cabo, I was asked to come into the precinct. Detective Vega met me in the lobby. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much either. They had detained Marcus at the airport when he landed. He was escorted off the plane by federal agents as soon as he cleared customs. They brought him in under suspicion of insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and false reporting. He wasn't handcuffed, at least not right away, but she said his face had drained of all color when they read the preliminary charges out loud. When they interviewed him, he called it a misunderstanding. Said the ransom photo was a joke that went too far. That Clarissa took it on a dare, that it was supposed to be funny, that he never actually expected me to send the money, like the whole thing had been some elaborate prank between colleagues. Nobody laughed. Vega told me the digital trail was clear. He'd used Clarissa's laptop to send the image. They'd found it saved in a temporary folder. The email account was created the night before the flight. The phone used to send the ransom text had been purchased at a prepaid kiosk 2 blocks from our apartment. They had surveillance footage of him buying it. He drained our joint savings account 3 days before the trip. Not a withdrawal I would have caught in real time. The account was technically his, something we set up years earlier when we moved in together. We used it as a catch-all for business overflow and shared expenses. I didn't monitor it daily because I had my own systems in place. I trusted him. He used a shell agency to book the flights, an LLC registered under a name I didn't recognize but later traced back to one of his old domain purchases. Clarissa's name never appeared on the reservation. Everything was in aliases. It was deliberate, structured. He never intended to come back. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the fact that he had time to stop. At any point, booking the tickets, writing the ransom demand, tying the fake knot on that chair in that stupid photo, he could have stopped. He could have changed his mind. He didn't. When I got home that evening, I sat on the couch we'd bought together 5 years earlier. It was on clearance at a warehouse outlet, and we'd spent a weekend assembling it. I remember Marcus insisting on reading the instructions upside down like it was a game. I'd laughed back then. Now I couldn't even look at it without feeling sick. Detective Vega had followed me home. She needed a statement, said I could give it now or later, but I chose now. I didn't want this dragging on any longer than it had to. I answered her questions calmly. Too calmly, probably. I watched her face as I described how I'd wired him money before, how I'd handled his taxes, how I'd logged into accounts and cleaned up invoices he forgot to send. She didn't say anything for a while. When she finally spoke, she just said, "You did a lot for him." I nodded. Yeah, I did. She closed her notebook and asked if I needed anything. I said no. She left quietly. I didn't cry that night. I thought I would. But instead, I opened my laptop and made a spreadsheet. I went through every account, joint and personal, every credit card, every vendor login. I started itemizing the damage. By midnight, I'd found over $80,000 in questionable charges from the past 6 months alone. Some were buried in company expenses. A few were listed under consulting fees. Others were labeled vaguely: client entertainment, digital marketing, travel reimbursements. There were spa receipts, boutique clothing stores, international transfers labeled business retainer. I recognized the names of a few restaurants, ones we'd never been to together. It was all there in plain text. He didn't even bother to hide it well. I emailed our accountant and asked for a forensic audit of the last 2 years. She responded first thing in the morning with a short, stunned message saying she'd get started right away. The media got hold of the story 3 days later. Someone from the local business journal reached out for comment. I didn't answer. They published it anyway. The headline was dry: "Tech CEO under investigation for faked abduction," but the comments weren't. Everyone had an opinion. Some called him an opportunist. Others called him a sociopath. A few called him brilliant, in that twisted way some people admire criminals for being organized. My phone blew up. Friends, coworkers, acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years. Some expressed shock. Some pretended to be concerned just to ask for details. One woman I barely knew from a networking event sent a voice note saying, "I always had a weird feeling about him. He was too polished. Too something." Like that helped me. I stayed quiet. I didn't issue any statement. I didn't post anything online. I didn't owe anyone my story. What I couldn't stop thinking about was the way he looked in that photo. The calculated slump of his shoulders, the mock fear on his face, the slack rope. It was a performance, but the cost was real. He'd humiliated me, not just privately, but publicly, legally, financially. There were still people who assumed I was part of it. That maybe I knew, that maybe it was a joint scheme gone wrong. My employer called me in, not to fire me, thankfully, but to ask questions. They said they understood the difference between his actions and mine, but I was still placed on administrative leave while they reviewed reputational concerns. I understood, I didn't argue, but it hurt anyway. I kept remembering the way Marcus used to talk about building a life. He said it all the time. "We're building something," as if every late-night brainstorm or big client win was part of a shared dream. He said it after we got married, when we signed the mortgage, when we got the business license. But he wasn't building anything with me. He was building something on me. And when it was time to disappear, he didn't hesitate to try and extract one last payout. I told my sister everything over lunch the following week. She listened without interrupting. When I got to the part about the ransom, she didn't say anything for a full minute. Then she looked at me and said, "That's not just betrayal, that's pathology." She wasn't wrong. I'd paid for his dreams, his freedom, his startup, his second chance, his self-image. All he left me with was debt and humiliation. But the strange thing was, I wasn't angry yet, not the way I thought I would be. What I felt mostly was tired. Tired of cleaning up after him, tired of believing things would change, tired of being the one who always recalibrated. So I stopped. I called a lawyer. And I started making a new list, one that didn't include him in it, not even as a footnote. I filed for divorce the next morning. There was no moment of hesitation, no lingering look at our wedding photo. I'd already spent weeks pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. That part was over. I walked into my attorney's office with a folder under my arm, copies of account statements, emails, screenshots, receipts. Everything I could find that traced the damage back to him. She didn't ask why I was filing. She didn't need to. I called the bank from my car and froze our remaining joint accounts. They needed his signature to close them, but I was able to lock access for the time being. I moved what little was left into a new account in my name only. I updated all my passwords. disconnected my name from every business document I'd ever signed on his behalf. It took most of the day, but by the time I got home, there wasn't a digital trace of our shared life that I hadn't already started to sever. Marcus tried to call that evening. His number was still saved in my phone then, so it lit up with his name. I let it ring. He tried again an hour later, then again around midnight. The voicemails started the next morning. The first one was short. "Aaron, I know you're angry. I lost control. I didn't mean for this to spiral. Please call me." The second one was longer. "I still love you. You have to believe that. What I did, it was a mistake, a really, really stupid mistake. But we've been through worse, right? We can figure this out." No, we couldn't. He kept leaving messages over the next few days. They shifted in tone, pleading, defensive, apologetic, angry, then apologetic again. It was like watching someone cycle through every stage of grief while refusing to admit the loss was permanent. His parents called too, his mother first. I didn't answer, so she left a message. "Hi, Aaron. We've been talking to Marcus. He's very remorseful. We know he made a terrible mistake, but he's still our son. He's still your husband. Maybe you could think about his future before making any final decisions." His father emailed. It was short, cold. "We hope you'll be reasonable." That word, reasonable, kept echoing in my head, as if that was the role I was supposed to play now. Be the calm one, the steady one. The woman who paid the bills, held the line, restored the peace. Not anymore. Instead, I forwarded every message to my attorney. Then I called the insurance company. The fake kidnapping had triggered a fraud alert on our homeowner's policy. I didn't realize it at first, but Marcus had listed the ransom money in a recent claim, labeling it as part of a robbery that occurred during travel. I only discovered it when an investigator from the company reached out for clarification. The claim was filed the day after he returned from Cabo. I told the investigator everything. Sent them the same folder I'd given my lawyer. Emails, receipts, bank records, even the resort's online confirmation. They asked if I was willing to give a formal statement. I said yes. The process moved fast after that. The investigator coordinated with the police who were already building a case. Within 2 weeks, Marcus was charged with insurance fraud, attempted extortion, and criminal impersonation. Clarissa was brought in for questioning, but her involvement was harder to prove. She claimed she thought it was a prank, that she didn't know he was going to file a claim, that she never saw the ransom message. It was believable enough, or at least not provable otherwise. Marcus's lawyer issued a statement to the press calling it a regrettable lapse in judgment and a stress-induced act with no malicious intent. No one bought it. The comment sections on every article were brutal. Former employees chimed in anonymously about his erratic behavior. A few old clients pulled their contracts from the company. The board called an emergency meeting. He was asked to resign the following Monday. He tried to fight it, claimed he was being misrepresented, that the media was twisting the narrative, but suddenly no one was defending him anymore. Not even his own team. I stayed quiet through all of it. I didn't grant interviews. I didn't respond to messages. I didn't post a single word about what was happening. Instead, I focused on cleaning up what I could. I dissolved the last LLC with my name on it, terminated the lease early, citing financial hardship due to fraud, packed up our apartment, my apartment now, and moved into a smaller unit across town. It was strange seeing our lives in boxes. The framed prints, the dishes we picked out together, the blankets from our anniversary trip to Colorado. I donated most of it, kept a few things, not out of sentiment, but because I didn't have the energy to replace them yet. Some days I woke up thinking it hadn't really happened, that maybe I had imagined the photo, the phone call, the resort. Then I'd check my phone and see another headline. CEO who faked kidnapping faces federal charges. I kept a running folder of those two, not out of vindictiveness, just for documentation. If he tried to contest the divorce or the asset division, I wanted a paper trail, something official to hold up in court if I had to. What surprised me was how quickly the silence after him became a relief. I expected it to hurt longer. I thought I'd miss the texts, the shared routines, the way we used to debrief our days over dinner. But the absence didn't ache. It clarified. I could breathe again without needing to explain why. I didn't have to navigate around his moods or manage the image of a marriage that had been hollow long before it collapsed. People started asking when I'd start dating again. I wasn't even out of court yet, and they were already trying to move me forward. I wasn't ready, not because I missed him, because I was still figuring out who I was without him. And the truth was, I liked the quiet. I liked not being tethered to someone who saw me as a means to an end. I liked waking up and not wondering what mess I'd be cleaning up that day. The night the divorce was finalized, I opened a bottle of wine and sat on the floor of my new apartment. No ceremony, no toasts, just silence and a long exhale. I thought about all the times I'd bent over backwards to accommodate him, the times I'd rewritten our budget because he forgot to track spending, the pitches I'd stayed up late editing, the gifts I gave him when his mood dipped, the excuses I made to clients, friends, myself. And for what? So he could take my money and my loyalty and turn them into props for a fake hostage scheme. That wasn't love, that was theft in disguise. Now I had something he never would. A clean slate. And the clarity to never let someone like him into my life again. Marcus's company unraveled faster than I expected. Within a week of the charges going public, half of their clients pulled out. The other half sent emails requesting confirmation of who was still at the helm, if anyone. The board tried to issue statements distancing themselves from him, but it was too late. His name was on every pitch deck, every public-facing message. The brand had been built around his voice. When that voice became synonymous with felony charges, there was nothing left to salvage. Clarissa disappeared the day after he was taken into custody. She left Cabo quietly, took a direct flight to Chicago, and never returned to the office. She didn't answer media requests or post online. Her work email bounced. Her LinkedIn was deactivated within 48 hours. I wasn't surprised. She'd always struck me as someone who knew when to cut ties. Marcus, on the other hand, tried to rewrite the narrative, said she'd manipulated him, that it was her idea, that she'd made him feel cornered, used words like emotional blackmail. Claimed she orchestrated the whole thing and he just went along with it. The digital trail didn't support that story. Investigators traced the ransom message back to his IP address. The burner phone had been purchased with his credit card. The email account was set up on his old work laptop. Every step of the setup was documented. He didn't have anyone left to hide behind, not anymore. The court didn't pursue a full trial. He took a plea deal, 6 months in county jail with probation and restitution. No one fought it. No one protested outside the courthouse. The public had moved on to the next scandal by then. He went in quietly, his lawyer issuing a final statement about healing and accountability. The kind of words people use when they don't know what else to say. I sold the house while he was still inside. It wasn't easy. The market had dipped and the listing sat for longer than I wanted. But eventually, a young couple made an offer. I signed the paperwork with a cheap ballpoint pen and didn't look back. I moved back to my hometown, temporarily at first. I told myself it was just until things settled. But the more time I spent there, the more it felt like something I hadn't realized I missed. There was a kind of steadiness to it, grocery stores that hadn't changed in a decade, streets I could still navigate half asleep, a pace of life that didn't revolve around proving anything. I got a job in compliance at a mid-size firm. Nothing flashy, just clean, structured work, reviewing contracts, checking for discrepancies, making sure no one slipped through cracks that people like Marcus counted on. The irony wasn't lost on me. My coworkers were kind but curious. A few had read the story. One asked if I was that Aaron. I said yes. He didn't bring it up again. Every few months, Marcus would send an email, always from a new address, always with the same format. A short apology followed by a vague update on his life. He never asked questions, never acknowledged that I hadn't responded, just typed as if we were still mid-conversation. The first one came from the jail library. He said he was reading a lot, thinking about his choices, that he hoped I was healing. The next one came after his release. He was staying with a cousin in Arizona, said he was working odd jobs, trying to figure out what was next, said he missed having someone who believed in him. I read each one, then archived them. There was nothing to respond to, nothing new. Just the same man, still trying to narrate his own redemption without ever listening to the damage he caused. I didn't hate him, not anymore, but I didn't trust him, and I didn't pity him either. What I felt was closer to clarity, like finally stepping out of a fog and realizing how long I'd been squinting to see what was right in front of me. He'd spent years selling potential, making promises he couldn't keep, building a house of mirrors and calling it ambition. And I'd stood beside him, holding it all up because I wanted to believe in the best parts of him. Now, with distance, I could see the whole picture. He wasn't some misunderstood genius. He was a man who used other people's loyalty as currency, and when the balance ran out, he forged checks with their names. I started going on walks again, real ones, not power walks squeezed in between conference calls, but slow ones around my neighborhood. I reconnected with old friends, rejoined a book club, took a class on digital forensics for no reason other than I wanted to. No pressure, no angle. For the first time in years, my time was mine. One afternoon, I got a call from the district attorney's office. They confirmed that Marcus had completed his sentence and paid a small portion of restitution. They asked if I wanted to be notified of his location in the future. I said no. He could be anywhere, I didn't care. What mattered was that I wasn't there. He tried launching another startup a few months later. I saw a press release on a niche tech blog. The language was full of buzzwords, resilience, innovation, second chances. His name wasn't listed as CEO, but I recognized the writing. He never could resist a tagline. The site went offline 2 weeks later. Someone must have pulled funding, or maybe the name recognition worked against him this time. People have short memories, but not when there's paperwork. I didn't feel satisfaction watching it fall apart, but I did feel something like confirmation, proof that I hadn't imagined it, that I hadn't been overreacting or dramatic or ungrateful, that the collapse wasn't mine to carry anymore. Sometimes I wondered if he'd ever really understand what he lost. Not just me, or the house, or the job, but the safety of someone who showed up for him even when he didn't deserve it. I don't think he ever saw it as safety. He saw it as a given, something he was owed. But the thing about support is that it's not a birthright. It's a choice, a daily one. And when you spend long enough taking it for granted, eventually the people holding you up stop showing up. And the fall is yours to take, alone. That's where he was now, not vanished, just fading, slowly, and I had no desire to pull him back into focus. He asked to meet once, sent an email with the subject line, "For closure." No punctuation, just those 2 words. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The message itself was short. He said he wasn't looking to fix anything, just wanted to apologize, face to face. Said he understood if I didn't want to, but if I could spare 20 minutes, it would mean something to him. I sat with it for a while. It had been over a year since the last time I heard his voice. The idea of seeing him again made my stomach tighten, but not in the same way it used to. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. I wondered what he wanted, what he hoped I'd say, and whether seeing him would undo any of the progress I'd made. In the end, I agreed, not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to know what he looked like now, what kind of version of himself he'd become without me. I picked the place, a coffee shop near the courthouse. Bright, neutral, public. I showed up 5 minutes early and took a seat near the window. I didn't bring anything with me, no laptop, no book, just my phone and a small bottle of water. I didn't want distractions. I just wanted to see him clearly. He walked in wearing a button-down and jeans, no blazer, no watch. He looked thinner, a little older. His shoulders were slightly hunched like he was bracing for something. He spotted me, raised his hand, and approached the table slowly. "Hi," he said, standing awkwardly until I gestured to the seat across from me. He didn't order anything, just sat down and folded his hands on the table. "I'm not sure where to start," he said. I didn't respond, just waited. He took a breath and said he was sorry. For everything. For the lie, for the money, for the way he made me feel like I was the one holding everything together while he took more and more. He said he'd been going to therapy, that he'd been sober for 6 months. I didn't know he'd been drinking that much, but apparently that was part of it too. He said Clarissa moved to Denver, that they hadn't spoken in over a year. He didn't blame her anymore. said he knew now that the choices were his. I thought I was the victim, he said. For a long time, I really believed that. I asked, of what? He hesitated, of expectations, of pressure, of not being enough. I nodded slowly. You were enough, you just weren't honest. He looked down. There was a pause, then he asked if I hated him. No, I said, I don't. He looked surprised, a little relieved, maybe even hopeful. But I also don't forgive you, I added. His expression shifted. I'm not angry anymore, I said, but that doesn't mean I'm handing you redemption. He opened his mouth to say something, then stopped. I'm not here because I think you've changed, I said. I'm here because I needed to see if I still felt anything. He waited. Do you? Not the way I used to, I said. I used to carry it all, the blame, the shame, the confusion. I let it color every part of my day. Now, it's just a story that happened to me. It doesn't define anything. He looked like he wanted to say more, maybe ask for another chance, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded. I get that. We sat there a little longer. He told me he was working for a logistics company, managing inventory, said it was boring but stable. He'd moved in with a roommate, was trying to rebuild his credit. Nothing dramatic, just small steps. I wanted to tell you in person because I knew I wouldn't be able to say it right in writing, he said. I believed that. For all his faults, Marcus had always been more persuasive in person. That was part of the problem. When he asked if I thought we'd ever be friends again, I said no. It's not personal, I told him. It's just not something I want. He nodded again, more slowly this time. He stood up a few minutes later, said he didn't want to take up any more of my time. I watched him walk out of the coffee shop and disappear into the late afternoon crowd. I didn't feel anything heavy. No sadness, no triumph, just stillness. Forgiveness wasn't the goal. Accountability was. And accountability didn't always mean jail time or public shame. Sometimes it just meant sitting across from the person you hurt and realizing they no longer need anything from you. Not answers, not apologies, not closure. I paid for my water and left. That night, I went for a walk. Same route I always took, down by the river, past the library, loop around the corner bakery. I didn't think about him once, not until I got home and saw the empty inbox. No follow-up email, no second message, just quiet. That was when I knew the story was over. It didn't need an epilogue, or a reunion, or a neat bow at the end. It just needed to end. And it had. It's been 3 years. The story doesn't follow me anymore, not really. Every once in a while, someone will recognize my name in an old article or mention the case in passing, but it doesn't sting the way it used to. It just feels distant now, like reading a headline about a stranger. I'm remarried, quietly, simply, no big announcements, no long speeches. We eloped last fall in the mountains, just the two of us and an officiant who doubled as our photographer. It wasn't about making a statement. It was about building something real without performance. My husband isn't flashy. He doesn't fill a room the way Marcus used to, and thank God for that. He doesn't posture. He listens. He shows up. I never have to guess where I stand with him. There's no scoreboard. No trade-off between affection and approval. The first time I told him about Marcus, really told him, he didn't react with pity. He just asked how I got through it, not why I stayed so long, not what I could have done differently, just what it took. That told me everything I needed to know about who he was. I didn't marry again because I needed someone. I married again because, for the first time, I knew I didn't, and that made all the difference. There was no urgency, no fear of being alone, just a calm kind of certainty that this person saw me as a whole human, not a stepping stone, not a fallback plan, not a backstage crew member for his spotlight. We bought a small house together last year. Nothing extravagant. 2 bedrooms, a little porch, a patchy yard that we're slowly learning how to take care of. On weekends, we drink coffee in mismatched mugs and read the paper. I volunteer once a week at a financial literacy program for women navigating divorce. Most of them are in survival mode. Some of them are still clinging to a version of love that looks more like obligation. I don't give advice unless they ask for it. But when they do, I tell them this. You can't rescue someone who's built their whole life around being rescued, and it's not your job to try. Marcus's name still pops up now and then in business alerts. I've got a filter set to send them straight to archive, but sometimes I glance anyway. He's tried launching 3 different companies in the past 2 years. One was a productivity app. Another claimed to offer high-integrity consulting services for founders navigating crisis. The latest one looks like a dropshipping scheme with motivational branding. None of them have lasted longer than 6 months. The LinkedIn profiles disappear as fast as they go up. There's no traction, no press coverage beyond the initial launch, just silence, collapse, reset, repeat. He's still trying to reinvent himself in a vacuum, still writing the kind of bios that say a lot without saying anything, passionate about transformation, dedicated to rebuilding trust. Phrases that sound like penance but read more like placeholders. I don't wish him harm, I just wish him away. There's a particular kind of freedom in not needing revenge, in realizing that consequences don't always come in the form of jail time or public disgrace. Sometimes they just look like nothing working out anymore, like a string of false starts, like watching the bridges you once burned never get rebuilt. Sometimes justice is quiet, not cinematic, not loud. It looks like sitting on a sunlit porch on a Saturday morning while your past tries and fails to call itself back into relevance, and you don't even notice until someone else points it out. Looking back, I don't feel bitterness, just relief. Relief that I didn't keep carrying his shame like it belonged to me. Relief that I stopped justifying behavior that never improved, that I stopped believing potential was enough to stay loyal to. People ask me sometimes if I think he ever really loved me. I don't know. Maybe, in the only way he knew how. But the truth is, I don't think love matters if it's built on imbalance. If it takes and calls it support. If it punishes you for asking to be treated like an equal. I don't think love means much if it only survives because one person never calls time on the performance. Marcus faked his escape, and in doing so, he revealed how trapped he already was by his ego, his desperation, his refusal to do the work. He tried to make me the fool, the collateral, the one who would clean up after the stunt like I always had. But I didn't. And he's been scrambling to rewrite the ending ever since. Meanwhile, I walked away. I built something else. Something quiet, solid, honest. That's the part no one talks about when they ask for the happy ending. They want the new love, the better job, the vindication. But the real resolution is this: peace. Not the kind you have to fight for. The kind that just sits with you, stays. So no, I don't check the headlines anymore. I don't listen for updates. I don't trace his whereabouts or track his projects. That part of my life is done. He exists in past tense now. And I don't. If you made it this far, thanks for listening to my story. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been lied to by someone you trusted completely? Would you have forgiven him or walked away like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if stories about betrayal, boundaries, and starting over resonate with you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There's more where this came from.